everyone, welcome to a weekly report of the daily Bible reading, and I know this video is extremely late and I'm really sorry about that. I've been letting things just get the better of me, like distracting me and such, and get me away from reading the Word. But we're here now, and we will do a report now, might be brief, on the week of May 10th through May 16th of the daily Bible reading. Now, going off an Old Testament, we are currently in 1 Samuel, or were during that week. And so we begin, as Samuel grew old, he appointed his sons to be judges over Israel. So, of course, they're still on the theme, at that point, we're still on the theme of judges, judging Israel. Oh yeah, and then on May 10th we also see basically the man who is picked to be the first king of Israel, because the people of Israel wanted a king so bad, and because they saw how the other kingdoms were being ruled, and they're like, hey, we want a king now too, even though literally the whole thing was to not follow what the other nations did, because what the other nations were doing were sinful and wrong and disgusting in the Lord's eyes, and yet they wanted a king anyways. So Samuel gave them what they wanted. But they were still taught a lesson afterwards, if I'm not mistaken, after they got a king. And they chose Saul, or God chose Saul. Saul was a very handsome man, and he stood out among the people of Israel, and he was chosen as Israel's first king. Now, let's see. Yes, on May 11th, Samuel poured a flask of olive oil on Saul's head. He kissed Saul and said, "I'm doing this because the Lord has appointed you to be the ruler over Israel, his special possession." Now, let's see. They get their king, of course. Let's see. And then, of course, on May 12th, Samuel asks about what sins he has committed against his people. They said none. The people said none. And, of course, Samuel mentions correctly that the Lord is a witness to all of this. And the people acknowledge that too. And, of course, Samuel mentions about things that have happened in the Israelites' history, such as when the Israelites cried out to the Lord in Egypt, and even also God sending Gideon, Baden, Jephthah, and Samuel to save them, and you lived in safety according to Scripture. Then the Lord sent Gideon, Baden, Jephthah, and Samuel to save you, and you lived in safety. Let's see. Excuse me. On May 12th, it specifies in chapter 13 that Saul was 30 years old when he became king, and he reigned for 42 years. Now let's see. And then, of course, on May 13th, we see Saul's son Jonathan make a move against the Philistines, which was the Israelites' mortal enemy at this time. And he basically turned the entire war up and around, because before this, it seemed like the Philistines had the Israelite army just completely outnumbered, outweaponed, and it seems like that the Israelites were not going to win. And in fact, many Israelites fled at the sight of the Philistine army, and what arms, or what weapon, or what massive armies, or what a massive army they raised. But Jonathan was able to break that up thanks to the will of the Lord. And what even happened was the Philistines even started killing each other in confusion. And people who had previously defected to the Philistines, at that point, sided with Saul and attacked the Philistines. Quite a story. Oh yeah, and then of course in May 13th there was a point in time when Saul made a curse upon his people that basically, or he made them take an oath. I'm sorry. He made his people take an oath. That basically said that they shall not eat food until what is it? Okay, a little bit behind this. Oh yeah, here it is. Let a curse fall on anyone who eats before evening, before I have full revenge on my enemies. So after he made this oath, his son Jonathan got a taste of honey on the end of a stick, and they casted lots, and it turned out that, and they found out that Jonathan was the guilty one, and the reason why God did not want them to advance against the Philistines, go and attack them. And Saul said that he should die. He said that his own son should die. But the people defended him. They basically said, like, oh, look at all the great things your son did in helping us to secure victory for Israel. He can't possibly be killed, or we should not kill him. So the Israelites, if I'm not mistaken, protected him, and he did not die that day. Now let's see. Oh yes, and then in oh yes, and now in May 14th, the straw that broke the camel's back, or more like the straw that broke God's trust for Saul. So Saul was told to attack the Amalekites, destroy them completely, destroy all the children. Yes, it says right here, destroy the entire Amalekite nation, men, women, children, babies, cattle, sheep, goats, camels, and donkeys. And what did Saul and his army do? They brought back the best of the cattle, and they kept the king alive, but they killed everything else. Or, I'm sorry, they kept the best of the livestock alive. Let's see, how does it describe? Let's see. The army spared the best of the sheep, goats, and cattle. So, yes, they did spare the best of the sheep, goats, and cattle, and they kept the king alive. Which is, of course, completely goes against what God told them to do. He blatantly told them to destroy everything. So, of course, this ultimately broke God's trust between God and Saul, and God basically left Saul, more or less. The Spirit of God left Saul, and after that point, Saul became tormented at times by a Spirit of God tormenting him within. And after this point, of course, we get the arrival of King David. Well, he wasn't king at this point, but later on he becomes king. A little spoiler alert. But we see David looking extremely promising to become future king over Saul. Or, in replacement of Saul, as king of Israel. You get what I'm saying, yes. Oh yes, and after after they spared the king of the Amalekites, Samuel took it upon himself, I'm sure with God's will, of course as well, to execute the Amalekite king. Now keep in mind, Samuel was a really old man at this point, but he still went through with it. So, continuing on, David was chosen someone special, someone that God chose. What exactly did he choose him for when he first picked him out? One sec. The Lord's anointed. It talks about anointing. Tried to this all please again. I know I have sinned, but please on the same instead bring King Agag to me. I'm full of hope. Yeah, Agag was the Amalekite king. Now the Lord said to Samuel, "You have mourned long enough for Saul. I have rejected him as king of Israel." There it is. "So fill your flask with olive oil and go to Bethlehem. Find a man named Jesse who lives there, for I have selected one of his sons to be my king." So you see from this very early on point, he chose David as king of Israel. Soon after he rejected Saul as king, he chose David, a nobody. It's powerful. In fact, David even himself says that his family is nobody, or his dad is nobody. And his family are just peaceful people living out in Bethlehem. And he became king of Israel under the will of God. Powerful stuff. And then, of course, like I mentioned with this, the Spirit of God tormenting Saul. Well, David became a harp player, and after David was anointed, the Spirit of God dwelled within David, and I don't know if this made him a talented harp player, or if he was already a talented harp player, but he wasn't playing the harp for a living before this. I'm pretty sure he was a shepherd, guiding the sheep and all that, and protecting them from foes, or protecting them from danger. So it's a little different from harp playing, but anyway, after he was anointed, he was able to become Saul's harp player, which helped to soothe Saul and made this tormenting spirit of the Lord leave his body. So it's very fascinating. And then, of course, later on, we get the famous battle between the Philistines and or it wasn't really a battle. It was a battle that almost was, but didn't. It was it was like a sort of standoff, sort of, on two separate hills and a valley in between them. And the Philistines there was a champion that stood out among them and came out and basically defied God right in front of all of them, in front of his own Philistine brethren and the people of Israel. This giant named Goliath stared in open defiance of God in front of everyone. And this man was well feared in Israel. The moment they saw him, he was over 9 feet tall, and his armor is heavy, and all his weaponry, all his armor. In fact, all his armor, if I'm not mistaken, all his armor and the weapons, I guess weapons plural, that he had on him are heavier altogether. I'm pretty sure are heavier than the average man. So it was a very scary dude. But then, very scary man, yes. But then David was able to kill him pretty easily, actually. Under the will of God, he was able to throw a sling right into, not just on, into Goliath's forehead. And it knocked him flat on the ground on his face. And then David was able to cut off his head, just as he said he would. Just as David said he would do to him. And it made David very favorable in the eyes of Israel. In fact, all his victories later on that he did for Israel which proved to be extremely successful, especially compared to Saul. Well, Saul did really well, I think, in his earlier years. But I think at this point in time, David was doing much better than Saul. And he gained a pretty good favor in Israel. He became very popular. And in fact, Saul even became fearful of David, because he saw how the Lord was working within David. And he was fearful. And he knew that the Lord was not within him. And in fact, there were times where Saul would become enraged by the Spirit of the Lord. It would come upon him, and Saul would try to kill David. Of course, he'd be unsuccessful, but he'd still try. And David ended up marrying Saul's second oldest daughter. He ended up giving his eldest daughter to another man. And Saul wanted him dead. Saul wanted a way for David to be killed by the Philistines, which of course didn't happen. And in fact, there was a task that he had for him to marry his second oldest daughter, Michal. It's spelled Michal. He wanted David to bring him the foreskin of 100 Philistines. And you know what David did? He brought him 200. I guess, obviously, just to say, well, I don't know if he did this just to say he could. I mean, he obviously was able to do this, but I think it's a testament to just the power that God works within people. Is showing Saul, look what my servant David was able to do under my wing, under my will. He was able to kill twice as many as expected. You thought that he would be killed by 100. I showed you that he, under my wing, can kill 200. Not only did he kill 200, but he brought the foreskin of 200 Philistines. And then, of course, Saul had no choice but to have David marry his daughter, Michal. And Saul, under seeing how successful David was, how much God was with him, and how much Michal loved David, he became even more fearful of him. And then one night he tried to kill him, and David fled. And then at one point, Saul made a promise to Jonathan. Jonathan, of course, wanted to get information out of his dad. Jonathan already did, and he informed David to hide in the fields. And Jonathan was able to get his father to come out to the fields so that he could talk with him about what was going on. And Jonathan even convinced Saul to promise that David will not be killed. However, Saul still wanted David to be executed. So he had men. He had the idea of having men outside of David's house to kill him the next morning when he came out of his house. However, David's wife found out about this and told him to run. And she helped him escape. And his wife tried to cover it up, with that old, oh, he's actually under the bed trick, or under the sheets trick. She put an idol under the bed and put a thing of goat hair at the top to make it look like it was him. And then she told the guards that he was sick in bed, and David still wanted him dead, or Saul still wanted David dead. And they found out, of course, that it was a trick, and they're like, "Why did you deceive me?" And David ended up running to where Samuel was living. Remember Samuel? And Samuel kept him there for a while, and guards when the guards, there was a report, they found out eventually that David was living there with Samuel, or that he was over in that region. And the guards were tasked to go and kill him. Or I think it was to go and kill him, right? Let's see. He said capture him. Okay, so I guess he wanted him brought back, then be killed probably. So he sent guards to capture him, and then the guards, the Spirit of the Lord was filled them, and they started prophesying. Then Saul sent more guards, and they started prophesying. And then Saul sent a third thing of guards, and they started prophesying. And then Saul basically got mad and said, you know what? I'm going to go down there myself. So then Saul went down there, and then he himself, even he, was filled by the Lord's Spirit, and started prophesying day and night. And he even tore off his clothes and started praying in the street, and started prophesying day and night in the streets. And in fact, it even says at the end, the May 16 Old Testament reading, it says, the people who were watching exclaimed, "What? Is even Saul a prophet?" Yeah, this is at the end of the Old Testament reading on May 16. Even Saul, yes. So then, of course, there's the New Testament stuff where Jesus is in his ministry, and he's teaching the very good lessons from the New Testament. Let's see. Like how it talks about, like in the May 16th reading in John, when he's talking about, you are truly my disciples if you remain faithful to my teachings, and you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. But we are descendants of Abraham, they said. We have never been slaves to anyone. What do you mean you will be set free? Excuse me. What do you mean you will be set free? Jesus replied, I tell you the truth. Everyone who sins is a slave of sin. A slave is not a permanent member of the family, but a son is part of the family forever. So if the Son sets you free, you are truly free. Good lessons like that for the New Testament during the week. And then, of course, we had nice Psalms. Really great. Speaking of that, speaking of great Psalms, they will be repeating, or they will be rolling over, repeating, whatever, next month, I think it is. I think like June 2nd or June 1st. I think like June 2nd. They will roll over. So that we will start back over on Psalm 1. So be ready for that. They got to roll over eventually. There's like, there's like 150 Psalms in like over 300 days. So they have to roll over eventually. If they thinned each out to fit all 365 days, or 367 on a leap year, of course, then there would be... No, 366. Why did I say 367? 366 on a leap year. If they did that, they stretched them out, they would be so small. Some of these Psalms are already short. Like Psalm 112 is actually pretty short. It's only 10 verses. So imagine that cut in half. And so many that are also short, cut in half as well. So anyway, Proverbs are also really good as well. They're full of good lessons, such as in the May 16th one. Mockers hate to be corrected, so they stay away from the wise. A glad heart makes a happy face. A broken heart crushes the spirit. A wise person is hungry for knowledge, while the fool feeds on trash. Very good words there. And good lessons from both the Psalms and the Proverbs from this week. And of course, good readings from that week all around. So, I hope you guys have enjoyed this video and enjoyed this lesson on that week of the daily Bible readings. I know we are very much behind on these videos, but I will try to catch up soon enough, or whenever I can. When I can, we'll figure that out. I'll figure it out. God willing, I will catch up one of these days. So please keep me in my prayers for that. Or please keep me in your prayers for that, please. To help get me to catch up and to stay on my guard and to stay on the readings. I need help with that. I'm not exactly the best reader. I'm not exactly the best at keeping up with reading either, as you can tell. So anyway, I hope you guys have enjoyed this video and this lesson. Thank y'all so much for all the support. Please let me know if you guys see anything in this video. Or let me know if there's something in this video that you think I'm missing from this. Please let me know in the comments what you think that is. Thank y'all so much again, and we will see y'all next time. God bless.